Hi, thank you for joining us today. My name is Madison with Abrams Realty. I am one of the licensed property managers here. Today, we are talking about what to do when a tenant does not pay their rent. I know this is a very scary thing for a lot of property owners and something that, kind of deters people from actually renting out their property. But we are here to kind of explain the process if that does happen and, kind of how to overcome that as well. So, dealing with an unpaid rent. How to deal with a tenant who is not paying their rent is a headache for most landlords. If you're in this situation, it's important to handle it correctly and to make sure that your property is being, properly taken care of, as well as your assets with the property. And we help landlords navigate this issue all the time in regards to getting a tenant who is not paying out or get them to start paying again. When a tenant signs their lease, in that lease, it states that rent is due on the 1st and it's late if not received by the 5th at 5. Now, come the 5th at 5, we then send these notices called pay or quit notices. What this explains is that the tenant has an additional 5 days to pay their rent on top of the late fee that has been added. Some companies are, different. They charge a flat fee for the late fee. As for us, we do a 10% of what the rent amount is. So come the 5th at 5, if they have not paid their rent, we add a late fee to that rent, as well as we send out that pay or quit notice. If your rent is not paid in full with the late fee by the 10th at 5 p.m., we then send your file to our attorneys to start the eviction process. Now, with this process being very lengthy, it tends to take a little bit longer. We're looking at about 45 to 50 days for possession, sometimes even a little bit greater depending on the city you're in. So getting a head start of that on the 10th of the month is kind of where we prioritize making sure we're staying ahead of it. Now, with that being said, if that does happen, from there, we then, notify the tenants, of course. They have up until their court date to actually pay the full balance with all the late fees and attorney's fees that are assessed to that to ensure that they do not get evicted. If they do not pay that full balance by that court date, then the eviction, continues and we eventually get possession of the unit. In some cases, some companies have a grace period if the rent is due on the 5th, but it's a weekend or a holiday. In our case, we don't do that. We actually have an after-hours drop box. So if a tenant were to not be able to pay their rent online, which a lot of tenants do, they can come in person and use our after-hours drop box if our office is closed. And then we actually have a staff member come and check it to make sure that they did pay their rent on time. Something that we do here that is a little different than some companies is come the 4th, at 5 p.m. Typically, we're staying ahead of who hasn't paid yet. I will say that with Abrams Realty, we do a very good job at vetting for our tenants. So we don't have too many tenants that don't pay on time just because we're looking at that residential history before we're even getting them into the unit. But in the case that, they are running a little bit late on funds that month, or they may be a day or two behind, or sometimes it is the holidays around Thanksgiving, Christmas, families in town, and people tend to forget. We do send reminders. A lot of companies don't do that, but we actually send a reminder on the 5th before 5 p.m., typically around, 3 or 4 p.m. Hey, this is a reminder, we haven't got your rent yet. At your earliest convenience, just make sure you pay your full balance and then we'll take the balance what they owe. And sometimes they tend to forget, or they think that's very helpful. They're like, oh my goodness, thank you. We had family in town, we totally forgot. So that tends to help remind them that it is the 5th. It's almost 5 o'clock. And then sometimes that actually prompts tenants to say, you know what, I'm going to be 2 days, 3 days late, what the case may be. And it keeps it on our radar. That way, we know, hey, this tenant said they were going to be a couple days late. The fee still applies, unfortunately, but, in regards to sending them to the eviction or sending them to our attorneys, we do keep that in mind as well. Another thing that kind of sets us apart from other companies is that we have in our property management agreement what we call Landlord Rescue. Landlord Rescue through Abrams Realty is a process where the owner pays us upfront $595. This is a filing fee to our attorneys. And in return, it's exactly what it states, is that we rescue the landlords. Landlords who have to do rescue, it's typically a self-managing owner who advertised the property, got the tenants in themselves, had a couple months of tenancy, everything went great, but then out of nowhere, the tenant just stopped paying and defaulted. A lot of landlords don't know the right course of action in regards to getting a tenant who's not paying out of the unit, so they kind of come to the professionals. So we take it over and we introduce ourselves, let them know, hey, you are a default. This is, how much you do. We are taking over this process and we will be sending your files to the attorney. And typically when that happens, it kind of sparks something in the tenant to be like, okay, well, I could have got away with this for a little bit, but now that these property managers have stepped in, they know what they're doing. So, and they don't want to get kicked out of my house. It can kind of go both ways. A lot of landlord rescues, we are able to kind of help the tenant, guide them, getting them caught up on what rent they do owe. So we're going to talk about eviction now. So in the case that, we send the pay or quit notice, tenant doesn't pay by the 5th at 5. We send the pay or quit notice. We've given them 5 additional days to pay their rent and the late fees. By the 10th at 5 p.m., they don't pay their rent, they don't pay the late fees, they don't pay anything. We have to send their file to the attorneys. From there, once we get a court date and we follow through with that, we get a actual date of possession. We meet the sheriff out at the property. From the time you get possession to the time that you meet the sheriff out of the property, it could be anywhere between 7 to 14 days. It really just depends on the sheriff's schedule. Unfortunately, we are not party to that, and it's really up to when they are available. But if we make it all the way to the end of the eviction process, we get there, the sheriffs are there, they fulfill the eviction process. From there, we get a lot of questions on now what do we do? Usually with an eviction, they get what they can out, but they usually leave a bed or a couch, or, maybe there might be some food in the fridge or whatever the case may be. The tenant does have 24 hours to contact you to get their stuff from the unit. If they don't, and you don't hear from them, which is a very common situation, usually once they're gone, they've left. They're not trying to get anything else back out of the unit. And from there, it's like, now what? Now what do we do? And this can be a little scary process just because you aren't sure of the damage going in, and it can be very overwhelming. I'm being a property manager and doing this for a very long time. I've seen, the worst of the worst, and I've seen situations where it's actually not bad at all and it just needs a simple cleaning. In that case, we work with the owners to make sure that we get a vendor out there, making sure that we get the unit cleared out. The typical things that you're looking at are a junk removal and then a cleaning. And then usually after you get those things done, it's not too much after that. So it's just ensuring that we have a quick turnover and then get that property owner and that property back on the market to get a new tenant. And that way we are getting those funds back in from the owner who hasn't had those funds in a while. Some simple things just to kind of take away from this is to make sure you're properly vetting for your tenants. Make sure that, you are looking at their residential history. You are contacting past landlords, making sure that, they are who they say they are. It's not going to be a situation of subletting or squatting, and just really being, very sticking to what the lease actually says. A lot of owners, they end up, hurting themselves by giving an extra day here, a couple days there, and what it does is it allows leniency for the tenant, and they think that they can get away with more. So just really sticking to what your policy is on rent collection and then forcing it when it doesn't actually happen. Thank you for coming and, listening. I think that rent collection is huge, and that's obviously where everyone needs to get paid. So making sure that your tenants are paying on time, and that if they don't, we have the proper avenues to go and to take care of in regards to if we have to go that route with eviction, or even just sending them the pay or quit notice, just to ensure that we are serious and you do need to pay your rent on time. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you next time.